My name is Elijah Meeks, and I was the technical lead in the Orbis project. That meant that I did the software development and a lot of the backend and designing a lot of the visualizations and implementing all of that. So Orbis is a transportation network model of the Roman Empire. What we try to do is simulate constraints to travel and movement of goods in the Roman period. We did that by building a transportation network model based on roads and rivers and sea routes, and integrated into that a schematic representation of speed for the movement. So, travel by foot has just a generic 30 kilometer per day rating. Fast army travel, I think, is 60 kilometers per day, that kind of thing. And a schematic representation of movement on the rivers based on particular rivers, based on the research of Walter Scheidel. And what Orbis tried to look at was it tried to look at the contingent shape of the Roman world that was based on priority, time of year, and mode of travel, mode of transportation, to try to give a more realistic, more historical understanding of what the shape of the Roman world looked like to the participants within it. I think that one of the challenges you have is that the Roman Empire is particularly well mapped from a GIS perspective, but even so, it has gaps. There are regions due to cultural reasons are very well mapped, and then other regions that we have gaps in the data for. And so I think in any project like this, you run the risk of creating a model that's a schematic representation that is itself contingent based on the lack of evidence because of factors that had nothing to do with the Roman Empire. We factor that in by making a highly schematic version of the Roman transportation network. In the second implementation, there were some advances in the routing library, the network routing library that we used in Postgres, that allowed us to calculate, to use the Dijkstra calculation that determines network distance, network cost, and least cost paths, that allowed us to do what's known as a one-to-many Dijkstra. So you could, instead of just calculating a path from one place to another, it's actually, if you look into the way that this algorithm works, it's actually almost as cheap, only a little bit more expensive to calculate a path from one site to 800 sites. For a lot of digital humanities projects, this so what factor is prominent, because in many cases what you find is exactly what highly invested scholars already knew about a system. And so some of the details of what you find are in the particulars, but you do see interesting fractures in cost from different centers that line up with the ways that the empire changed in shape after it changed in center. So once the center moves to Constantinople, once the Eastern Roman Empire becomes at the forefront and the capital is moved to Constantinople, you'll notice, if you run these cost calculations, that the western edge of that version of the empire corresponds very well to the maximal extent of the Eastern Empire's ability to project power into the West. I think the other exciting thing that you find is there are regions that are accessible from the perspective of movement of people, but aren't as accessible from the perspective of cost to ship goods. And so you see regions like Germany suddenly subject to a new computational narrative, where it was efficient to move troops to Germany and project power, but it wasn't efficient to move goods into Germany. From an economic perspective, Orbis was built, in Walter Scheidel's words, he said it's going to be used by 30 people, and he knows who all of them are. And that was the expectation. You'd build this thing, and it would be for scholar-to-scholar communication. And instead, Orbis has been used broadly across the academic community, outside of the humanities, and also by a lot of just sort of the lay public. I think in the past, historians and other academics had to choose between being an academic historian or a public historian. And I think that well-designed works like this can bridge that gap and provide more meaningful content for both scholars and for the lay public. And I think that's very exciting.